Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be tackling something it's a bit more intense, but also something we think will be really empowering for you. We're going to be looking at love bombing, and especially how it relates to autism. So the source material that we're diving deep on is a blog post, and it's called Autism and Narcissist Love Bombing. And we're here to really break down this concept for you and giving the tools so you can recognize love bombing if it happens to you. And most importantly, how to protect yourself.
I think a really important starting point is to recognize that love bombing isn't simply about being showered with lots of affection. It's actually a calculated tactic of manipulation. So you can almost imagine like someone setting a trap, making it seem appealing and safe, but with some hidden dangers lurking beneath the surface. And that's really the core of what love bombing is all about.
Okay, so it's not just like, someone giving you lots of gifts and compliments. Like there's something kind of more sinister underneath that.
Absolutely. It's about creating this really intense sense of connection very quickly as a way to gain control. If you think about it kind of like a spider web, it looks soft and enticing at first, but it's ultimately designed to trap its prey.
Wow, that's a pretty intense analogy.
Yeah.
So how does this, this web, how does it work? What are the stages of love bombing?
You can really think of it as having two main phases. The first phase is really like the love bombing itself. So you're talking about the over-the-top flattery, the constant attention, like the whirlwind romance. The narcissist really wants you to feel incredibly special and loved. Almost like you found your soulmate.
So it's like they're creating this like perfect illusion of like the dream relationship.
Precisely. And this is where the trap kind of springs in phase two. The narcissist starts to reveal their true colors. They become more possessive and controlling, and they really start to exploit that bond that they've created, using guilt trips and manipulation, even sometimes threats to keep you under their thumb.
So this shift is like deliberate. It's not like they suddenly change. It's like this is all part of the plan.
Exactly, yeah. Their goal is control, and they do that by creating dependence, feeding their own ego,
Yeah.
and ultimately, really avoiding any kind of genuine intimacy.
And now this is where it gets really important for our listeners, especially those on the autism spectrum. Why might autistic individuals be more vulnerable to this kind of manipulation?
I think it's about understanding how certain autistic traits, while strengths in many ways, can also be kind of exploited in these types of situations. And it's not about blaming anyone. It's really about giving you that knowledge and empowering you.
So the blog post mentions difficulty interpreting social cues as like a key factor. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Imagine you're trying to read a map, but some of the symbols are missing. You might miss some really crucial information. Social cues are kind of like those symbols on a map. And autistic individuals sometimes miss those subtle hints that something is off. So they might misinterpret the narcissist's intensity as genuine affection.
Right, that makes sense. The blog also mentions, a trusting nature, like that willingness to kind of believe the best in people.
Right, and a lot of autistic individuals are incredibly sincere. They have a strong sense of justice. So they're more likely to take people at their word. And this can make them especially vulnerable to someone who's, intentionally being deceitful.
And if someone's already struggling to kind of interpret those social cues, they might not be picking up on those inconsistencies between what the narcissist is saying and how they're actually behaving.
Exactly. And that's why understanding those mechanics of love bombing is so important. You need to be aware of those patterns, those red flags, even when they're very subtle.
So it's like knowing about this is kind of giving you that missing key to read the map. You can start to see the bigger picture and protect yourself.
Precisely. And it's important to remember, we're not just talking about romantic relationships here. This can happen in friendships, family relationships, even professional settings. It's about being aware of that potential for manipulation in any kind of power dynamic.
That's a really good point. So this isn't just about dating. It's about understanding manipulation, like in all its forms.
Right, exactly. Now let's dive into another factor that can make autistic individuals vulnerable, and that's sensitivity to criticism.
That's something I've definitely experienced. Even constructive feedback can feel really personal sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, in that second phase of love bombing, criticism and control really become major tools for the narcissist.
Yeah.
And that can be incredibly damaging to someone who already experiences criticism so intensely.
So you're already feeling vulnerable and attached to this person, and then they start using like criticism as a weapon. That's got to be really painful.
It can be incredibly damaging to someone's self-esteem. especially for someone on the spectrum who may already have that heightened sensitivity to criticism.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about difficulty with social cues, that trusting nature, and sensitivity to criticism. What's the final factor that the blog post talks about?
Well, it's something that might resonate with a lot of autistic individuals,
Okay.
and that is challenges with executive functioning.
Could you maybe explain what that means for anyone who's not familiar with that term?
Of course, you can think of executive functioning as like your brain's management system. It helps us to plan, organize, regulate our emotions, make decisions, and many autistic individuals do struggle with certain aspects of executive functioning.
So how does this relate to love bombing?
Imagine trying to assemble some really complicated piece of furniture, but you don't have the instruction manual. It's really frustrating and overwhelming. And that's kind of what it can feel like for someone with executive functioning challenges when they're trying to navigate a manipulative situation.
So they might know something feels wrong, but they struggle to actually articulate it or even take action.
Exactly. It can be much harder to set boundaries, to assert their needs, or even to recognize that they have the right to leave a situation that's hurting them. They may feel really stuck, almost like they're drowning in the narcissist's demands.
That's such a powerful image. So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We talked about what love bombing is, those two phases, and why autistic individuals might be particularly vulnerable.
We've also touched upon some really important concepts, like social cues, trust, sensitivity, executive functioning.
But remember, this is not about feeling powerless. It's about understanding the dynamics so you can protect yourself. Knowledge is power.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to be sharing some practical strategies for recognizing and resisting love bombing. So we're going to equip you with some actionable tools to navigate these tricky situations and ultimately build healthier and more fulfilling relationships.
So stay tuned for part 2, where we'll equip you with the knowledge and confidence to spot those red flags and build relationships based on genuine connection and respect. Welcome back. So now that we kind of have a grasp of how love bombing works and why autistic individuals might be more vulnerable, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how to recognize and resist those manipulative tactics.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that recognizing love bombing isn't always easy. It's
Right.
often subtle and disguised as genuine affection. And that's where trusting your gut instincts becomes so crucial.
That's interesting. So even if you can't explain it, you shouldn't ignore those feelings of unease.
Exactly. Your intuition is really often your first line of defense.
Yeah.
If something feels off, if the pace of the relationship feels too fast, or if you're feeling pressured, don't just dismiss those feelings. They're trying to tell you something.
So it's like that little voice inside saying, hey, pay attention, something's not quite right here.
Precisely. Yeah. And this is especially important for autistic individuals who might be grappling with interpreting those more nuanced social cues. Trust your gut. If something feels too good to be true, it probably is.
Now, the blog post also talks about the importance of setting clear boundaries. But, how do you actually do that, especially if you're not used to kind of asserting yourself?
Well, setting boundaries is really about identifying your needs and communicating them clearly and confidently. It's about recognizing that you have the right to say no without feeling guilty or obligated to explain yourself.
I mean, that sounds simple in theory, but it can be so hard to actually do, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with someone who's skilled at manipulation.
You're absolutely right. It takes practice, and it can feel really uncomfortable at first.
Yeah.
But think of it like building a muscle. The more you exercise that boundary-setting muscle, the stronger it gets.
Okay, I like that analogy. So let's say someone's pushing your boundaries. Maybe they're trying to guilt you into doing something that you're not comfortable with. What are some practical things that you can say?
Well, you could say something like, I understand you'd like me to do that, but I'm not comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I need some time to think about that.
Mm.
The key is to be firm and clear, even if it feels a little awkward.
And what if they keep pushing? What if they keep trying to wear you down?
Oh, that's a huge red flag. It shows that they're not respecting your boundaries. And in those situations, it's totally okay to remove yourself from the situation. You can say something like, I need a break from this conversation.
So it's about recognizing that you have the right to protect your emotional well-being, even if it means ending a conversation or leaving a situation.
Absolutely. You deserve to be treated with respect. And remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's healthy. It's about taking care of yourself.
Now, the blog also talks about self-care as being a really vital part of resisting manipulation. But I think a lot of people kind of misunderstand what self-care actually means.
You're right. Self-care isn't just about, bubble baths and face masks, although those can be nice. It's really about building resilience, strengthening your emotional foundation so you're less susceptible to manipulation.
So it's like prioritizing your mental, physical, and emotional well-being.
Exactly. It's about making sure you're getting enough sleep, eating nourishing foods, moving your body in ways you enjoy, and, engaging in activities that bring you joy and peace.
It's also about like surrounding yourself with supportive people, right? Like people who respect you and your boundaries.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a huge part of self-care. Nurturing healthy relationships with friends, family, or even online communities can provide you with a really important sense of belonging and validation.
Speaking of support, the blog post also recommends seeking professional help. So, like, when might it be a good idea to talk to a therapist?
Well, therapy can be incredibly beneficial if you're struggling to set boundaries, if you're feeling really overwhelmed by emotions, or if you're having trouble recognizing manipulative behavior.
So, like, a therapist can give you the tools and strategies to kind of navigate those challenges.
Exactly. They can help you build self-awareness, develop assertiveness skills, and create a personalized plan to protect yourself from manipulation.
So, it's about having that extra support to really empower yourself.
Precisely. And, therapy isn't just about fixing problems. It's also about personal growth and development. It can help you understand your strengths, build your self-esteem, and create a life that aligns with your values.
Now, let's move on to like some real life scenarios to illustrate how love bombing might actually manifest.
Mhm.
The blog post doesn't give a ton of examples, so let's paint a picture for our listeners.
Okay, great idea. So let's imagine you've recently connected with someone online, and they're showering you with compliments, telling you how amazing you are, how they've never met anyone like you before.
Right, and it's all very intense and flattering, and maybe they're sending you gifts or wanting to spend all their free time with you.
Exactly. It feels incredible at first, like you've found this really special connection. But then kind of subtly, things start to shift. They begin questioning your choices,
Yeah.
making you feel guilty for spending time with friends or pursuing your own interests.
So, like, the compliments and attention haven't stopped, but there's this, like, underlying sense of control that's kind of creeping in.
Precisely. They might start making demands on your time,
Hmm.
getting upset if you don't respond to their messages immediately,
Mhm.
or, trying to isolate you from your support network.
These are all red flags, right?
Right.
Even if they're disguised as, like, caring or protective behavior.
Absolutely. And this is where it's so important to recognize those inconsistencies between their words and their actions.
Mm.
They might say they love and adore you, but their behavior is controlling and manipulative.
So it's not just about what they say, it's about how they make you feel.
Exactly. If you're constantly feeling anxious, walking on eggshells, or second-guessing yourself, those are all signs that something isn't right.
And it's important to remember that, like, this can happen in any type of relationship. It's not just romantic partners.
You're right. Love bombing can occur in friendships, family relationships, even in the workplace. It's about recognizing those patterns of excessive flattery, control, and manipulation, regardless of the context.
So let's say you're in this situation and you're starting to, like, recognize those red flags. What are some practical steps you can take?
Well, I think the first step is to acknowledge your feelings. Don't dismiss those feelings of unease or discomfort. Trust your gut instinct. It's trying to tell you something important.
So even if you can't, like, totally put your finger on what's wrong, you should still pay attention to those feelings.
Absolutely. And then start setting boundaries. Communicate your needs clearly and assertively. For example, if they're constantly texting you, you could say, I need some space to focus on my work right now. I'll respond to your message later.
And, like, what if they don't respect those boundaries? What if they, like, try to guilt you or make you feel bad for setting those limits?
That's a major red flag. It shows that they're not prioritizing your well-being or respecting your autonomy. And in those situations, it might be necessary to distance yourself from the relationship, at least temporarily.
So it's about recognizing that you have the right to protect yourself, even if it means, like, taking a break from the relationship or ending it altogether.
Exactly. You deserve to be in relationships where your boundaries are respected and your needs are valued.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on something that the blog post doesn't explicitly mention, but I think it's really important, and that's the issue of self-blame.
Oh, yeah. That's such a crucial point. It's so easy to fall into that trap of blaming ourselves When we've been manipulated, we might think, I should have seen the signs, or I was too naive.
And I think that's especially true for autistic individuals who might already be grappling with those feelings of self-doubt or social anxiety.
You're absolutely right. And it's essential to remember that manipulation is a tactic used by the manipulator. It's not a reflection of your worth or intelligence.
So if you've been a victim of love bombing, please be kind and compassionate towards yourself.
Yeah. And remember, seeking support from a therapist or a trusted friend can help you process those feelings and move forward in a healthy way. You don't have to go through this alone.
So to recap, we talked about the importance of trusting your gut, setting clear boundaries, practicing self-care, seeking support when needed, and avoiding self-blame.
These are all essential tools for recognizing and resisting love bombing. And remember, building healthy relationships is an ongoing journey. It's about learning, growing, and continuously refining your understanding of yourself and others.
And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore those additional resources mentioned in the blog post. And we'll offer some final thoughts on how to create a more fulfilling and authentic life. Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into love bombing. You know, we've talked a lot about how love bombing works and spotting red flags and building resilience, but now I want to talk about creating healthier and more fulfilling relationships.
Yeah, that's a great transition. Yeah, the blog post mentions the importance of creating a more autistic-friendly world. And, to me, that means creating a world where everyone, regardless of neurodiversity, can navigate relationships with confidence and authenticity.
I love that. So it's not just about protecting yourself, it's about actually fostering this environment of genuine connection and understanding.
Exactly. And that starts with education and awareness. The more we understand about different communication styles and relationship patterns and, the potential for manipulation, the better equipped we are to really support each other.
So the blog post also encourages readers to kind of join the conversation, to share their experiences and advocate for this more inclusive society. Why is that so important?
Sharing your story can be incredibly empowering. It can help to break down stigma and create a sense of community. And it also opens up a dialogue about healthy relationships, about setting boundaries, and about respecting individual differences.
So it's about creating a space where people feel safe to be vulnerable and to kind of learn from each other's experiences.
Absolutely. And that's where those resources mentioned in the blog post come in.
Yeah.
Organizations like the National Autism Association and the Autism Society, they offer really valuable information and support for autistic individuals and their families. And there are also some great resources that are specifically focused on narcissistic personality disorder.
Awesome. We'll definitely include links to all of those in the show notes so you guys can check them out.
Yeah, and before we wrap up our deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question.
Okay, lay it on me.
So, now that you understand the dangers of love bombing, what qualities will you prioritize in your relationships? What kind of connections will you nurture?
That's such a good question. It really shifts the focus from what to avoid to what to actually cultivate.
Exactly. It's about being really proactive and intentional about the types of relationships that you want to build. Relationships that are based on mutual respect, open communication, and genuine affection.
So as we wrap up our exploration of love bombing, remember that knowledge is power. And by understanding these tactics of manipulation, you can protect yourself and create healthier and more fulfilling connections.
Yeah, and just remember to trust your gut instincts, set those boundaries, practice self-care, and never be afraid to seek support. You deserve to be in relationships where you feel valued, respected, and empowered to be your authentic self.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and empowering. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.